can. Good afternoon or morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining this panel that is part of a week of conversations put on by the Childhood Cancer Prevention Initiative. This is a panel about communities taking action, and we've got a great discussion for you today. And so I'm Bobbi Wilding. I'm the Executive Director of Clean and Healthy New York, and I also lead a national coalition called the Getting Ready for Baby campaign. I will be your moderator for today. And we are going to start by let me tell you a little bit about the Childhood Cancer Prevention Initiative. So this is the 1-year anniversary this week of the release of a report that documented the science connecting environmental sources of harm with childhood cancer, and then made the case for both business and policy action. And the purpose of the initiative that came together out of that report is really to have a space in which childhood cancer advocates and the childhood cancer community, as well as many other folks within health and environmental health, environmental justice spaces, can come together with businesses and others to really think about the kinds of change we can be making to prevent childhood cancers and move beyond just doing the necessary work of caring for families when they experience that tragedy. So today we're going to have a fantastic panel discussion. Just even the prep discussion was like, I was so excited to be part of that conversation. So hopefully y'all will really find this a dynamic conversation. We have 4 panelists joining us today. Sonal Jessel is with We Act for Environmental Justice. Walter Lewis is from the Homewood Children's Village. Alexis Luckey is from Toxic Free North Carolina and the Toxic Free Kids program. Rebecca Overmyer-Velázquez is from Clean Air Coalition of North Whittier and Avocado Heights. And I'm just going to call on each of you and just ask you to give a couple minutes about your organization and a little, sort of what brings you to the panel today. And so I think I'll start with you, Sonal. You want to go first?
Yes, thank you, Bobbi, and happy to be here. Again, my name is Sonal Jessel. I'm the Director of Policy at We Act for Environmental Justice. My pronouns are she and her. And We Act is a community-based organization that was started in 1988 out of direct action against a sewage treatment plant that was being placed in West Harlem. It was considered an act of environmental racism. And the leaders at the time, which includes our co-founder and executive director, Peggy Shepard, fought against the placement of this facility. And what ended up occurring out of that fight was the establishment of We Act. And so, since our beginnings, our theory of change is that we engage community members through organizing to find the solutions to environmental injustices. And we do that through policy, research, and education. And so why we are involved in this work and why this is important to us is that we know very well from lots of amazing research that has been done that it is lower income communities and communities of color across New York City, particularly, which is where we work, but across the US and the world really, that are exposed to toxic chemicals and other polluting sources that lead to higher rates of health issues such as cancer. And that's why we're really involved. So we do work on the state level in partnership with Clean and Healthy New York. We are co-chairs of the Just Green Partnership, which focuses a lot on getting toxic chemicals out of products that we know can hurt our health. We work on a lot of initiatives in the city and the state level around air pollution, local air pollution being connected to negative health outcomes, particularly in children, is a big concern. So all of these different things are really important to us, and it's really because we represent and work with lower income communities and communities of color that are hit first and worst by the hazards that lead to higher rates of health issues such as childhood cancer.
Thanks so much, Sonal. Walter, do you want to go next?
Sure thing. Hello, everyone. My name is Walter Lewis, and I am the president and CEO of the Homewood Children's Village. And, Homewood Children's Village, our mission is to improve the lives of Homewood's children and simultaneously reweave the fabric of the community in which they live. Our neighborhoods on the east end of Pittsburgh, and like many communities that are predominantly Black, we've experienced a lot of sort of disinvestment over the years has led to a lot of challenges that the community is facing. And in spite of those challenges, the community remains very resilient. Lots of amazing people, amazing young people, amazing folks in the community, lots of rich history. And so our work is really started from our co-founders who are from the community and found themselves back in their community trying to figure out what could they do to sort of help to restore the community and bring back some of the historical promise for the young people that reside in our community. And so, for us, we believe ultimately it takes a village to raise a child, support families, and transform a community. And so we take a holistic approach to doing that work. So that means, we don't just work with children. We work with their families as well. We try to support children all the way from the time that they're born until they graduate, go off to college, career, and life. But part of that holistic support means that we have to not just be invested in what happens in the school building, right? It's also what is taking place outside of the school building. And that brings us into these conversations around the environment, sustainability, and these issues that sometimes we're not talking about, but they're having tremendous impact, negative impacts on our young people's ability to be successful. And so our work in this space really is largely around educating and activating our residents to understand these issues so that they're able to be informed and make informed decisions, not only for themselves as individuals, but also in terms of pushing for policy change that makes sense to really strengthen their communities. And so that's really our work in the space, and we do our work collaboratively. And so we're not necessarily the world's foremost experts on environment and environmental justice, but we know that it's important to our families and it matters. And so we're in these spaces because our people are often the ones that are being most impacted by these things. And so we have to be in the conversation for our children, for our families, and for our future.
Thanks, Walter. Alexis.
Thanks so much for the opportunity to be here today and be a part of this conversation. I'm Alexis Luckey. I'm the director of Toxic Free North Carolina. We are based in Durham, North Carolina, and we've been around since 1986. And just like We Act, we started out of a community organizing. In this case, it was organizing against aerial spray of pesticides in North Carolina. A small community called Gorgas was being sprayed and people were getting sick, pets were getting sick, animals and flocks were dying. And so the community organized successfully to increase the barriers between where aerial pesticides could be sprayed and residences in rural communities. And that's been our work. We're really the organization in North Carolina that focuses on pesticide reform. And we do that work through policy advocacy, and we do it through organizing and skill building for change. We have two programs. One is Toxic Free Kids, and another is Just and Sustainable Agriculture. And both of these certainly speak to incidences of childhood cancer. The Toxic Free program, through that program, we're the only licensed provider of a training for childcare educators that reduce exposures in places where kids learn and play. And we've trained over the years hundreds of childcare educators in our state. We've also done a train the trainer for childcare health consultant nurses. I found the most success when we ways to get parents and families involved in that as well. We really see these as a way to open the door for conversation with families, not just about reducing exposure, but thinking about toxics in their environment in general and the need for more protective policies and getting active in their communities, whether at the institutional level, school level, state level, or even in some of our federal policy work. Another big piece of our organizing and advocacy work is around the farm worker community in North Carolina. North Carolina is a huge agricultural state. And children as young as 10 are able to work in North Carolina. So we have an initiative called the Farm Worker Health and Justice Initiative. It's part of our Just and Sustainable Agriculture program. And through that initiative, we advocate for stronger worker protections. We also work with farm workers and farm worker families to reduce existing exposures. And we provide a hotline support for farm workers who may experience a pesticide incident. And we're also building worker and worker family participation and advocacy. So we partner with the Episcopal Farm Worker Ministry, which is based in North Carolina, actually share a role, health and justice organizer between those two organizations, and work in coalition for change around these issues.
Thanks, Alexis. Rebecca?
Hi, thank you for holding this, and I'm really glad to be a part of this. This isn't something we always do. I mean, Clean Air Coalition of North Whittier and Avocado Heights is a community-based, grassroots, all-volunteer organization in Southeast LA County. This is a predominantly, lower middle income, working class part of LA County that is also predominantly Latinx and Asian American. And it's also historically been pretty impacted by industry, by the logistics industry, manufacturing, freeways. And in particular, in this part of the county, we have for us, a focus of our work is the last remaining lead smelter west of the Mississippi, actually, where that takes in the vast majority of the old truck and car batteries, but also a lot of other lead-bearing waste from around the world comes into this little corner of the county. And it's a significant non-complier. This Quemetco is the facility. And so we've been focused on that because that has the most direct, well, there's freeways, there's all kinds of sources of pollution out here. But this particular facility is a egregious emitter of lead and arsenic. And so the health concerns are pretty clear because it's been around for decades, since the late 50s, and was pretty much unregulated for all of that time up until the early 2000s. It's kind of shocking how late it took for a facility like this to actually be regulated. And so we're dealing with a legacy, actually, of kind of an ongoing pollution, but also legacy pollution that's in the soil and in people's yards. And so it sounds so familiar, so similar to what other folks are doing, trying to reduce exposures, alert people to the dangers of being outside, having everyone, take off their shoes, wash their hands, all those kinds of things are very similar. Our organization started, formally several years ago, actually around garbage. It was as the sewage treatment plant sounds familiar. There was a materials recovery facility that we're going to build out here to ship trash out for the whole county, right behind our houses. And so we've slowly been mobilizing around a variety of issues, the Quemetco facility being the most urgent one. And so we've been working with public health. We've been trying to partner with environmental science. We've actually have partnered with environmental scientists at USC. So we're relying on the kindness and the goodwill of a lot of folks around us because we don't have staff or funds to fund that. And so that's something I'll talk about later. Like how do you do this work when you don't have paid staff and you don't have the funds, but you can still actually kind of get things done. So anyway, that's all I'll say for now. Thanks.
Thanks, Rebecca. So hopefully folks can hear just the different things that bring people to this work, but yet it's all tied together by concern for children's health. So I was hoping, Walter, maybe you could just start off by talking about some of the biggest threats to children's health that you see in your community.
Thank you. Yeah, I think for us, we again kind of come at this from a slightly different lens, but I think some of the greatest threats to health in our community, when I think about it from the social kind of determinants, I think about racism and neglect. The ways that society often ignores and simply just does not consider the adverse effects of decisions and how they impact people that are not in the room. And so a lot of what we're dealing with in our community and some of these communities around the country are the knock-on effects of decisions someone else made in a boardroom someplace that just had no regard for the people's lives that would be most impacted. And when I think about how it compounds with the social determinants, so we often are talking about economic, instability, education attainment. We know that those things lead to poor health outcomes in adulthood, but because we're so busy dealing with those things and the things that are facing us today, we're not talking about some of the things like the built environment, right? And how that is impacting our health negatively and also contributing to, lower lifespans and things of that nature. Like in Pittsburgh, for Black folks in particular, like the infant mortality rate is extremely high, right? We talk about some of the immediate stressors and things that we know are impacting these things, but again, so many times we're not talking about the environmental aspects. We know we have inordinate amounts of lead in our soil. We've got these old pipes, and all of these things are happening, and we kind of know about it, but it's not able to always take priority because we're also dealing with things like gun violence, right? And things that are resulting from, again, this compounding of all of these different issues, right? When you don't have economic stability, right? When you have low educational attainment, it leads to a lot of these other issues that just really compound things for our community. And so for us, I think that it really becomes how do we begin to address some of these other issues and also include the environment into the conversation so that we're aware of the long-term impacts of what happens when you're exposed to all of these toxins. And when, your landlord is not necessarily invested in making sure that your building is safe for you to live in because they're not invested deeply in you in terms of your humanity. How do you wrestle with that as a community and so that it can better the lives of the people that live here? So I think those are some of the challenges that we face, but I think ultimately a lot of it goes back to, I think, racism and neglect, because we're not, as a society, deeply invested in creating policy and creating change and making decisions that really puts the people who are going to be most impacted at the center of those decisions.
Thanks so much. Sonal, why do you view this particular topic, maybe just to sort of build on what Walter was just talking about, like how does WEAC look at this, work it through the environmental justice lens or as an environmental justice issue?
Yeah, thanks. There's a lot of reasons I'll touch on too, based on the two topics that I mentioned before, just to keep it nice and organized. In general, for environmental justice, it's based on the idea that environmental racism exists and that people have been historically and systematically non-invested or denied rights or proper policies and programs for health. And we know that has disproportionately happened to Black communities, Latino communities, Asian communities, Indigenous communities, communities of color generally. In New York, where we work, in New York City, the communities that we work with most often are Black, African-American, and Latino communities. And what we know is that in Northern Manhattan, there are a lot of sources of air pollution that hurt children's health. So one thing that we really focus on are electric school buses. That's something that we want to see happen in New York City and in Northern Manhattan, because we see that the diesel exhaust from school buses is directly taken in by the kids on the school buses, and that is leading to like higher incidences of asthma. And asthma is actually the #1 reason for school absenteeism. I know that's true in New York. I think that's true in the United States. And the people that are most impacted by that, the children that have the highest rates of asthma, are Black and African-American children and other children of color. And we know that's because of all these different sources of air pollution being placed in their neighborhoods and in their communities, whether that be the buses or the bus depots. For example, in New York City, the neighborhood of Brownsville actually has a lot of school bus depots in it. So they're not only dealing with the exposure on the bus or when the bus drives around the neighborhood from diesel, but you're also dealing with the buses idling in the stations or pulling in and out of the stations. So you have higher rates of asthma due to that. So that's one reason, that's one example of why this is an environmental justice issue, is because it is children of color that are exposed more and deal with the brunt of these hazards more. The other example is the toxic chemicals, which we work on with Clean and Healthy New York, where disproportionately young women of color use more products, use more cosmetic products, use more beauty products than other races and other gendered people. And a lot of that has to do with the racist and sexist beauty standards that exist in the United States, where they're marketed to more heavily to use a lot more products, that they're using products that are unsafe or contain other chemicals. For example, also the South Asian community uses a lot of skin lightening creams, which we know contain chemicals that are bad for you, such as mercury. So all of those things are other reasons why we know that this is an environmental justice issue, because we see different communities of color being exposed to the hazards that lead to health impacts, whether that be immediate, like asthma, you see it happen in children really pretty short term, or the more long-term impacts that like toxic chemicals do in hurting your endocrine system or being endocrine disruptors and hurting your reproductive system, for example. So those are just some reasons why this is an environmental justice issue.
Thanks, Sonal. Rebecca, I was wondering if you wanted to just sort of reflect on the work that you're doing in your community and what kind of advice you would have for others in similar situations.
Yeah, I was thinking really the work that we're doing, and it's similar to other organizations, is really creating a sense, if there isn't a sense of community, helping to create a sense of a community and nurture that, and but also help folks develop an awareness of the community. It's hard. You realize how hard sometimes this work is to raise the awareness, because sometimes people don't always see the toxic threats. Like, it's not obvious, and sometimes you don't smell it, or you're just used to it. Honestly, I think a lot of folks, like, you just don't know the difference because it's always smelled like that, or it's always looked like that, and there's always been that, and so, in fact, I heard once a young man speak at a public meeting at the Air Quality Management District here. He grew up in the Riverside area, where there's a huge logistics industry. There's a lot of warehouses, and the pollution's really bad, and these houses are right up against homes. And he went off to college in Northern California, and he was like, oh my God, I didn't need my asthma inhaler. It smelled different. And so he came back and he became an organizer, because he realized that there was a difference and that it didn't have to be like that. And so for me, so I think that's sort of a basic challenge. And so how do you get people to be aware of that, and then encourage volunteers, especially when you're an all-volunteer organization and you're relying on people to care. How do you get them involved and then continue to keep them engaged, because they care about the community and they are understanding the threats to health, and focusing on kids really helps, I think, because it's a pretty easy way for families and parents to understand that. But you're also dealing with folks who are working 2 jobs and commuting in LA, and so the time commitments are also really difficult to maintain. And so one of the first things I would say is find those retirees, especially your retired ladies. They're around. They're grandmothers. They're taking care of grandchildren sometimes, a lot of the times. But sometimes they have skill sets. Oftentimes they talk to each other, and they're great at spreading the word, calling people. And so a lot of that is, trying to find those people who are connecting the neighborhood and connecting the community. I think one of them, there's a lot to say about this, but I think one of the things is you find those people, you try to get them engaged, and then you come up with all kind of creative ways to get people involved and engaged in a consistent basis on different things that people can do. And you just keep doing those things. And I could list off a whole bunch of them at some point. We can talk about that. But I think the other thing is, this is a lifetime's work, right? And so one of the key challenges in, especially with volunteer work, is that people burn out and they get discouraged because you're fighting industry, you're fighting the regulatory agencies simultaneously. So there's the regulatory agencies that are just as bad often as the industry that they're supposed to be regulating. And they're, friends. And so you have to deal with that. Yeah, so there's that can be frustrating, and it can be the wins and the successes can feel like they don't come as clearly as sometimes what feels like a loss. So you have to build in ideas and programs and activities that give people a sense of like, yes, we're moving forward. Yes, we accomplished something. And then also that this is just a never-ending process, and you have to find help people feel continually motivated, but also know that people will come in and they'll get motivated and they're excited, and those are great folks to have, but they will cycle out and then they will leave, right? And so then new folks will come in and they'll be excited and engaged, and then that's great, and that keeps the momentum going. But there's a constant churn of, there's always a core, but there's always a constant churn too of other folks who come in and out depending on their time and their families and all that stuff. And you have to be really flexible to keep the doors open for a lot of different people to keep getting involved and keep the organization and the cause that you're fighting for, keep that momentum going all the time. And so anyway, those are just some ideas. I'll stop now. We can talk later more.
Great, thanks, Rebecca. Alexis, you talked a little bit about both like work that you do on the ground, but then also how this connects with policy advocacy. Can you say a little bit more about how your work dovetails those two?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Before that, just wanted to head to what Rebecca was saying. I think about that quote from Audre Lorde about there is no such thing as a single issue struggle, because we don't lead single issue lives, right? And so much of our work and even our programming just has to acknowledge that intersectionality of people's needs and what's going on in their lives. And they don't just want to show up to a meeting about one kind of water quality contamination if they're dealing with issues from water and air and all other kinds of different kinds of pollution. And so a big part of our conversation, both in sort of community education and awareness and also in our policy advocacy, is that we need to be advocating for policies that are really thinking about that kind of cumulative health risk and all the risks of exposure from many kinds of pollution that environmental justice communities are experiencing. In terms of our policy work, Toxic-Free NC was really instrumental in passage of the 2006 North Carolina School Children's Health Act, which mandated integrated pest management in schools, reduction of diesel fumes from school buses. I think it had some stuff about mold and mildew and eliminating arsenic in school playgrounds. But there was a big gap in that policy because it was only for K through 12 public schools, and it didn't really address kids under 5, which, in many ways are more vulnerable to a lot of those exposures. So our Toxic-Free Kids program is really to address that gap until better, stronger policies are made. And we also see policy as integral to our work in a lot of our other programming. Our farm worker health and justice work is paired with advocacy for stronger worker protection standards. We are the only watchdog of the North Carolina Pesticide Board. We show up at every meeting and we track all of the farm worker cases. And, we're really working to build stronger implementation of the worker protection standards in North Carolina and to build stronger awareness around those. Another big piece of our work, another big threat to children's health in North Carolina is PFAS. We're one of the third, I think we're the third largest state of exposure to PFAS in the country. And so right now, a lot of our work is education and awareness with families to get them active and organized around steps we can take to just even begin to regulate PFAS as a class in this country.
Okay, thanks. So I've got some other questions that I'm going to ask the panel as a whole at this point so we can have more of a conversation. But I also want to invite the folks who are in the audience. If you use your chat function, you can send a chat to the panelists, and I will be pulling from your questions as well as the ones that we thought up in advance. So if there's something you'd like either a particular panelist to speak to or you'd like to hear from a number of them, please feel free to make those suggestions in the chat. So, I heard a lot of different threads about how your organizations engage community members to organize to address things. And I just wanted to open it up just to sort of build on what Rebecca was talking about and maybe just offer, create a space to talk more about what are some of the organizing strategies that you all have used that you found to be effective and motivating for your community members to be engaged in making a difference. And I just, I'm not going to call on folks, I'll just let you jump in.
Yeah,
Walter?
I can jump in. I think just kind of what Alexis was saying in the beginning, just around the whole idea that you can't tackle this from a single issue standpoint. I think for an organization like ours, that was even why we ended up in this space in the first place, and so for us, even beyond just the environmental justice issues, we're often talking about, again, these other issues families are dealing with as well, like education or, economic, stability, job opportunities, things of that nature. And I think by us being willing to just understand where folks are and meet them where they are, we found that folks are much more open and interested in having these other conversations. Because I think, it's kind of like, if we're in a ship that's sinking, like let's plug the holes first and make sure we don't sink before you start talking to me about, where we're going to navigate to, at the end of our journey. And so I think that's what we found. And it's interesting. It's not so much that you even have to convince people that these issues matter. It's more so just give me the space to breathe so I actually have time to deal with this. And then the other thing is like, I think Rebecca was talking about this just with folks are working sometimes 2 jobs and 3 jobs and, getting on public transportation. They might have kids at different schools. And so often we create these public events or whatever we want people to come to. And it's like, it's like 5 o'clock, just like right after work. We don't always have food, or we have food, but it's not good food. It's not like I can't feed my family on it. And so I'm going to drag my kids to this meeting, not eat, the baby's crying, go home and then fix dinner. Like, it just doesn't make sense for a lot of families. I think what's been amazing for us is the pandemic. We never did virtual meetings before the pandemic. We just didn't do it. And I can't tell you why we didn't do a bunch of virtual public meetings, but having more of that option, we found has made meetings a lot more accessible to families. You have people on the bus jumping on a call, and maybe they're just listening in, they don't have their video on, but now they're able to get the information, ask questions in the chat. And that's been a game changer, what we've seen in terms of getting community members to the meetings. Now, you still have the issue of making sure folks have internet access and access to an internet ready device. But again, I think we've been making some moves in that direction, and we found that that's been very helpful for organizing and engaging our residents, and then even bringing in residents from across multiple communities into the same kinds of conversations. So I think those have been a few things that have really helped us in terms of our engagement with community.
Some other folks?
I would second that. It's been actually hugely helpful to bring people together virtually since the pandemic. We've really seen that as one upside of an otherwise really unfortunate and difficult situation for our communities. I would also bring in that we approach different community conversations with what we call a polluter accountability framework. So depending on the community that we're engaging with, we really challenge, those with more resources to have more responsibility for the level of pollution that they're taking on. And we're often approached by groups that want to do something very specifically in their community. And so part of our responsibility as an organization is, questioning how those resources are spent in their community versus the state in general and those downstream. And I think that's been a really just kind of helpful aligning framework for how we choose to do our work.
I mean, I can add one thing. I agree with what everyone said, and Walter's definitely right about how to like plan around people. I think that's what is really important. And I don't work on the organizing team, so I attribute all this to the organizers on React, but just spend a lot of time doing one-on-one conversations. I think that's the big thing, is that it helps build trust, and that we also have been around for a really long time. I think that also makes a big difference. I think that having people feel like you and what you do as an organization is part of the community, not just here for the community or doing charity for the community or whatever it might be, is like the important, I think, framing to get people to be involved.
Yeah, and I guess I would add that I think, not communities are not homogeneous, and it's like there's a lot of different perspectives, and so a challenge is to have it open for all kinds of people to be involved, and even folks who may not agree on politically, they may not agree in other kinds of ways, but you've got to try to keep it open so that everyone who cares about the community can be there and from their different perspectives. And I think that's really important, is to just, basically we try to keep the sort of partisan politics out of the door, outside, and just focus on the concerns and the challenges that our particular community faces. Now, that's not simple, right? Because you also need to work with your political representatives, and ours are, we're a very democratic county, and our immediate representatives in our part of the county are county supervisors. And so, but we're working with our political representatives all the time, and keeping, there are some people in our organization, in our community, who really want to do that work, and that's really good. So we make sure that also gets attention. So I'll back up a little bit. I think one of the things that really helps is that you start, and this gets to this question of the politics in some ways, you start with the groups that are already in your neighborhood, that there are, there's organizations, there's churches, there's PTA, there's neighborhood councils, there's homeowners associations, and I'm telling you, right, they all come from very different places politically oftentimes, but they're organized, right? And they are there because they care about their families, their communities, their kids, their school, their church. And so I think one place to start is with those groups that are already there, and then try to build out in ways that increases the environmental part of the organizing. Sometimes that's not always abundantly clear, right? And this is like what Walter's saying. I mean, these are issues that seem like they're not connected to the environment, but they are, and helping people kind of see that is really important. So doing that work, but then also doing building in a variety, I think, and this is what I alluded to before, building in a variety of different activities that different people with different interests and different strengths and inclinations can participate in. So we've done things like, like a petition, like have a petition and have it sent to your representatives, or send it to the agency, and have people circulate that petition, and have people talk to each other about that petition, or whatever it is that you want in your community. And that's one way to get people involved. There's all kinds of ways to do that. You get people to go to public meetings together, and carpool if you can, like get people to help each other go to these meetings. The virtual stuff helps a lot now too with that. Do protests. That some people really like to do that, and just get out on a corner somewhere with banners and signs and whistles and make noise. Like that's what some people want to do that. Other people just want to meet their neighbors. We've done health surveys. So a health survey, going door to door, knocking on people's doors, connecting with folks in their homes, meeting with agency staff, contacting the press. There's all different things that people can do, but also having fun. And I think that's the part that sometimes we neglect. And so like having fundraisers at people's homes, like we've done bingo fundraisers with gift baskets that people put together with variety of things and raffles and, you know, just having some live music. If someone, you know, has a band and they want to play music and there's some dancing, and having a chance for people to come together over something that's fun is really, really important. And if you can make a little money on the side, then that's even better. And some people are, it's just like the thing that they do is they are really good at planning parties, and they don't want to do the other stuff. They don't want to be on a protest march. They don't want to stand on a corner. They don't necessarily want to talk directly to their neighbors, etc. But they love planning parties. And that brings the community together. And then you're, you know, building connections and momentum again. And I just think it has to be like all of the above has to happen. So you need different people plugged into the organization to do that.
As you've been doing the work in each of your communities, can you talk about like a significant barrier, either a challenge that you sort of face consistently across different issues that you're working on, or you know, just some kind, you know, like an ongoing barrier, or perhaps just like a common challenge that you see in your work that is a frequent obstacle?
One thing I can think of that's a challenge that I find, at least in Pittsburgh, is it's like momentum. I think there's a lot of people with a lot of great ideas. There's a lot of issues and a lot of things that need to be done, to improve the lives of people. And usually it's very challenging. You can't do it all at the same time. And so how do you coordinate and collaborate with the different agencies around the different initiatives, and even amongst residents, right? Like we've got a group of residents from 3 communities, and through one of our latest projects that's doing work at the intersection of climate change, health, and equity. And they're getting ready to get into the policy phase where they're going to figure out policies. And, you know, we're not trying to decide for them because these are resident driven and resident led policies, but we're hopeful, and we're certainly going to encourage residents that if amongst the 3 communities, they could come up with a single, you know, agenda to focus on that actually would benefit all 3, they're just going to be able to put more momentum behind it. We're probably going to be more successful at getting it done, but that's easier said than done, right? Because you've got a lot of people's, you know, different perspectives. So how do you bring all of that together? So I think that's something that we are certainly challenged with, is how do you get organizations to work together around these different initiatives so we can actually get enough momentum to get something done? Because, you know, I forget who mentioned it, but this work does not happen overnight. And so you want some of these big policy changes to take place. It's going to take more than 6 months, more than a year, sometimes sustained effort to actually drive the meaningful change. Because shoot, even after you get the policy change, you know, enacted, oftentimes there's the follow-on work of like, all right, what did we miss, right, in that first round of the policy, and what do we need to figure out how to adjust on the back end, or how do we need to work with politicians to actually make this thing happen? So I think that's something that we're consistently challenged by, is how to get folks working together long enough to sustain the momentum.
Other big challenges people face?
I would also add that, you know, sometimes the most impacted communities are also the ones with the least time capacity or resource capacity to get involved in making change. And when you're committed to community-led work, you know, you really have to be creative as an organization and acknowledge a lot of those barriers all at once, and do, you know, whatever you can to be as flexible as possible around those needs and to answer those needs. You know, you talked about childcare at the meetings, about having food at meetings. You know, we're working on a heat stress campaign and with farm workers. So that means having a meeting at like 6 or 7 p.m. on a Friday night. And, you know, working with farm workers in general, I mean, there's so many challenges because they're, you know, many of them in North Carolina are migrant groups and seasonal workers, and just they don't have the time and capacity always to commit to the work. And so at the same time, we don't want to move forward with any advocacy without, you know, their involvement and their leadership in some way in those campaigns. And so that's just a constant, I think, reality of working with the most impacted communities.
And if I could just jump in there, and this is something that we've tried to do, I can't say that we've been successful yet, but we run into that same challenge too. Whereas the person who, you know, the voice that you really need at the table, I mean, they got work to do, right? They got kids to raise. And so I think one thing that we're trying to do more of is figure out, like, how can we pay people to do this work? Because your voice is the one that's needed at the table, and that's value, right? And this system isn't going to change, or won't be changed necessarily in the right ways if we don't have you present. So how do we find more resources to pay people for their time and expertise? There's often a lot of people getting paid lots of money to do things that supposedly fixing the systems that we're on the ground trying to figure out how to clean up the mess. Let's pay some of the folks in our communities to actually be involved, and not like a little $100 stipend. Thank you for coming out and giving us your life energy and insights, but like pay them a wage or a salary. But that's easier said than done, because, you know, there's not always foundations and organizations that are interested in giving to something like that. And so, but I think that that's something that could really make a huge impact if we were able to figure out how to do that.
I would, yeah, I think you're right. And for us, I talked about retirees, and they're great, but because they have time, mostly, like they're the ones who have time. It's the youth. We really have a challenge trying to get youth, like young adults and teenagers. I would love to have their energy on a consistent basis, their talent at social media, their talent with social media, and, you know, organizing each other on social media. We really we don't have that enough. We have an intern. We're luckily able to get some college students occasionally to want to get some hours with us, and that helps, I think. And I think I need to do more of that. We need to figure out that program more, some way that they get some bang for their buck. I think tangibly, like you're saying, Walter, something that it's not just this feels good and I'm glad to do it, but actually, no, I get something directly out of this, either, you know, hours that I need because of community service, or you know, a wage, something. And so I would say that part, bringing youth in and getting them connected on a long-term basis is one thing I keep thinking about all the time. And then I don't have time to really work on it. But anyway, so I don't know if other people have ideas about that.
So I was asking that question as a prelude to the flip side of that, is what's working? You know, what kind of successes are you seeing in your communities that you want to share as models that other people might want to reach out to you later and say, hey, I want to learn more about how you did that because I want to do that here in my community. So just sort of thinking about both tactics, but just also like, what wins should we be lifting up and celebrating today?
So I'll jump in, and this is kind of directly in response to some of what Rebecca was sharing, because I mean, I mentioned that I don't want to say that we figured it out, because I don't think we're at the point where we're like giving people full wages, but one of the things that, and we benefit because we're an organization that's dedicated to serving children first, and one of the things that we have is we're the lead partner agency for 3 community schools in our neighborhood. And so we have staff in the school every single day, you know, working to support kids, working to support teachers. And so we've been able to connect a lot of our programming to the schools. And I think that does provide more of those opportunities for youth, because some of this stuff can actually happen during the school day where we're partnering with teachers and doing things in the classrooms. Other things are happening in like after school programs. And so I think that's really helped us connect young people to these efforts. But we do realize, especially as they get older, elementary school kids, they're just happy to like be in the program. Middle school, it starts to like trail off. By the time you get to high school, I mean, kids, everything's boring, and you really have to like, I don't know, do backflips and stuff to like really keep high school students engaged. But what we found is I think that partnership with the school really helps. And then the other thing that we've done, which I think it's taken some time to try to get right, but we try to do a lot of intergenerational programming. And so having young people in programs where there's also elders in the program as well. So our most recent initiative called Change Champions, it's a partnership between us, the Green Building Alliance, and several other community organizations. But we had, that was the most intergenerational cohort we've ever had. I mean, we had young people from, under 18, we had 20 to 30-year-olds, we had like 40 to 50, we had 65 and up, all in the same cohort learning about the intersection of climate change, health, and equity. And I think that was really powerful. But Rebecca, to your point, I would say like finding ways to leverage a strong partnership with a local school, and not wasting time with schools who are not interested or don't have the, what's the word I'm looking for? The sort of innovative thinking to be excited about what you're talking about. There's a lot of schools you could spend 3 years talking about this and you still won't get it done. But there's other schools that literally you could pitch this to someone and within a couple of months, they'd have some students working with you. So I think if you find the right school partner, this is an amazing opportunity for young people to really get involved in something that's meaningful in their communities, that makes a real difference, and it's helping them to learn and master the content that they're learning in school. So I think if you could find the right educational partner, that could really help launch something like what you're talking about.
Thank you. You're right. And it reminds me of a success that we've had. I mean, part of this is that we had a really great relationship with a principal, and then the local school, but then she left. But we have a new one, and I would just say one of our successes, we through our, I think one of the things we've done really well is we've become partners with the county supervisor's office. So in LA County, we have 5 county supervisors, and we're an unincorporated LA County. And so effectively the county supervisor for our district is our mayor, right? And so we rely on her. This is Hilda Solis, who was labor secretary in the Obama administration, actually. And then she came back here, and we've had a very conflictive relationship with her, in part for good reasons, actually, but we've come to an agreement with her, and a kind of we have this relationship now, maybe because we went through some conflict and struggle. Now we're good. And so finding the right politician who has your organization's back is so helpful. And so they helped us put on this party that we just had on the weekend. It was a big community party in the park that we helped build that was part of the school. So it's a joint use facility next to this, right, and on the school district property, but it's county and it's community. And we got the principal involved, and the PTA got involved. And so what you're saying, Walter, is reminding me that yes, this is part of building those relationships and having the school see, look, this is a cool organization, and we're trying to work with the community and for the community. We're all members, like we're grandparents and parents. My kid goes there. So, and trying to build that. So that's a really, thank you. That helps remind me that we need to build that relationship. And I think that's so important. Those community schools that you were talking about, I've often thought that's what we all need. We need more community schools everywhere, because that is where parents and families gather. Yeah. So anyway, thank you. That's helpful.
Sonal or Alexis, do you want to share success that your organization's had in this area?
Yeah, I want to point to something that my coworker Taylor Morton has done, which is they educated hundreds of young people in environmental justice over just this past summer. And that's a success that WEACT has, and I think has been able to point to for a really long time as we've developed our program. This is called the Environmental Health and Justice Leadership Training. And essentially it's offered for, we have cohorts of young people or adults. The one that Taylor is working on was really focusing on the younger folks. And what we do is they sign up to take this course with us, and I go through a few weeks of training in the evenings. It's a couple of days a week, and they become quote unquote leaders in environmental justice. And they basically get a crash course to what are the health issues, what does it mean in environmental justice, how do you do advocacy work, how do you do research work. The point is to train people from communities of color, lower income communities, the disadvantaged communities, in how to be leaders for their community when it comes to environmental justice. And I think that program is really special that We Act runs and is really impactful. And Taylor and their team are constantly looking for new groups or schools or places to run the program with, because the point is really to train as many young people in leadership as we can, because I think that is so important for lasting change, because we're not necessarily asking them to sign onto a bill. We're not asking them to do that kind of work unless they want to join that part of our organization, but we're just giving them the tools they need to fight for whatever issues that come up in their life or in their neighborhood.
Yeah, this is a marathon. It's going to be a long haul, and we really do like to focus on celebrating the wins along the way. You have to, because it's going to be a while to get to where we're really trying to go. We have actually found success this year with a similar program that was really based around advocacy skill building. And instead of bringing people together around one kind of issue conversation, we've just found it's helpful to bring people together around that kind of advocacy and leadership trajectory. And that's been a lot of fun. And we're actually going to take that coming year into an EJ Academy with the farm worker leadership group that we're working with. So we're always learning. Yeah.
Thanks. So I think we're going to start wrapping up. And so my last question to all of you is really, what kind of support would be most welcome? Like, what are you looking for from folks who are not already engaged? How could people be useful to your campaigns?
Well, I guess I can jump in there. We are always looking for new people to put through the training that I just mentioned. So cohorts of young people are ideal. We also offer the class for adults. So one thing we always want to do is be building up expertise amongst communities of color or low income. And we do it, it's open. It doesn't have to just be in New York City. It could be in New York State. It could be other parts of the US. Especially now that we're virtual, we have a wider breadth. And the other thing is, we're a community-based organization, so we always are open for more membership, the more people we have involved and working and advocating for issues such as having school buses go electric, getting toxic chemicals out of children's toys, all of those different things that impact a children's lifespan. Having people working with us is always really, really helpful. I mean, we do days where we go and talk to all of our legislators, and I think that legislators listen really closely to members of the public that come and just share their stories or their experiences, more so than the advocates like us that they hear from all day, every day. They get bored of us. So it's good to have members of the public come in and participate and just talk about why it's important. I think it helps motivate legislators and motivate people to find the actual solution to the problem.
Rebecca, what kind of support would you be looking for?
Well, I think I touched on most of it, thinking about bringing youth in. And I think the idea of connecting with the local school is something I think we're going to do more now with this new principal. It's been exciting to think about what we could do. And I think he's excited by the possibilities too. So there's that. And I think, and working on building that up more as a community school. I think we need to do that. It's always been the center of the community. And I think the more we build that up and we bring in the youth and these kids to do more awareness training and advocacy training with the kids, I think that's what we need to keep us going. And that could bring in their parents in ways that, we wouldn't know that the parents would be. A couple of years ago, we did that a little bit with some in a partnership with USC, we had the kids go off and do air quality testing in the neighborhood with these, handheld devices, and walked around and kind of measured air quality around the neighborhood, and then use that data to start thinking about air pollution generally and the issues around air pollution. So it was kind of a science thing, but also very much a social, environmental justice focus. So that I think is really going to be crucial. So I want to do that. Of course, then there's the big thing, which is, we have an environmental regulatory agency that's terrible and just awful. And I was just talking to my Earth Justice lawyer friend, and we all want to sue this agency because it's so terrible. And it's, there's got to be a way to just to bring litigation against it, just because it violates all of our civil rights to health and a clean environment. I guess there aren't those rights. Maybe that's what we need to do, is like, we need rights to enshrined in law. Like, that's my right to a clean environment. But they are denying us that right because they collude with polluters. And I think that's it's just one of the biggest challenges we face, because it leads to a whole lot of cynicism in communities about what can actually be done. And it's terrible, because that's like a rot that eats away at the possibility of change in some ways. I'm kind of being exaggerated, but still it feels really awful, because they don't take us into account. They don't care about our public health and about public health in general. And so I would say that if we need anything, we need really a statewide campaign, and we're working on that here. I think slowly we'll see. There's been more movement among statewide environmental justice groups to really bring that agency to account, and it's the one that regulates hazardous waste facilities, like the one we're working with. And I think if we need that change too, from like the very top. And that's huge, though. Huge project. It's going to take a long time, but it's imperative, because that agency imperils so many communities. It puts so many of us in danger in so many different places. It's really bad. So I would say that's a huge thing. Anyway.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think for us, I mean, the basics, volunteer, donate, all of that good stuff. But I think the other thing for me is, like, we're local. So, we're east side of Pittsburgh. We don't necessarily even serve kids all over the city. But the reality is we're taking a localized approach to address issues that are relevant at a city, regional, national, like literally at a global level. And so I think that leaves lots of opportunities for groups to partner, share resources, knowledge, connections, and we're always happy to share the same. I think there's so much that we can learn from one another that will really help to accelerate the work that we're doing, not just here, but all around the country. So one of the things for me I always appreciate is the opportunity to connect with folks that are not in Pittsburgh or in other parts of the city, because I feel even better about the fact that the work we're doing, while it may be really focused on our neighborhood and our community, that it can maybe help somebody else in some other city, in some other part of the country, in some other part of the world. And I know we always benefit from those kinds of insights from others as well. So I think that's sometimes people don't think about that because we're so local, but we're always open to those kinds of connections and collaborations as well.
Great. Alexis?
I think Walter touched on this earlier, but we need to see philanthropy continue to acknowledge the time costs of community organizing and recognizing the value in labor and expertise of community members. And to speak to Rebecca's point, we need more accountability. We need everybody to be calling their decision makers into account.
Well, thanks so much, everybody. We're going to just close out with a few final slides and thoughts. And I really appreciate everyone who's been here today to be part of this conversation. We do have some next steps and resources that are available for taking broader action, and resources that may be useful that you could customize for your own local campaigns. So there's the Protect America's Children from Toxic Pesticides Act, which has been reintroduced in needs to be reintroduced in both the House and the Senate at the federal level. And so a way that you can help support communities across the country dealing with pesticides is by contacting your local leaders. We'll share these slides with folks at the end after the webinar is over as well. You can support the Childhood Cancer and Prevention Initiative at the link that's there. We will also have links for all of these organizations, I think, in the next slide. You can take action to protect yourself and your children. Oops, we don't have slides. We will send out links to everybody's website so y'all have them and make sure that that gets attached to this recording. Can you go back one slide, Debra? So I would just encourage folks to use this report that documents the ways in which particularly several of the themes that came out from our panelists without acknowledging it upfront cause childhood cancer. That's air pollution is a well-known, very clearly documented driver of childhood cancer, in addition to being causing asthma and other more short-term problems. Pesticide exposure is another significant driver of childhood cancer. And oftentimes worker exposures have impacts for their families. So it's not just home exposures to pesticides. And then other forms of toxics in products in particular, like paint and solvents, which again can be worker exposures. So there's the report was put out. There's a short video you can use. There's social media that you can use to help just sort of educate on the issues. But hopefully this is something that can be helpful to folks to tie the connections between work you're doing on the ground and some of the bigger picture. And you can sign on to the Childhood Cancer Prevention Initiative campaign. There's a sign on for businesses and the public. I want to again just thank all of our fantastic panelists. I could have just asked you questions all afternoon and learned from all of you and what your experiences are and the impact you're having in each of your communities. So Sonal and Walter and Alexis and Rebecca, thank you so much for your time. And again, we will make sure that links to all of these organizations and contact is available afterwards so that we can continue these conversations. And just thank you again to all of our attendees and everyone who's watching this recorded webinar. We really appreciate it, and keep up the work for preventing childhood cancer. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
It was really good.